Thank you so much for having me all here. My story begins 10 years ago. I lived on 82nd and Broadway with my family. That's Jacob and Ben and my husband, Mike. I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband was working at Citigroup, actually, with Sally Krawczyk. My kids went to collegiate. They loved to sing. We had a karaoke machine in our living room, and they liked to sing Disney songs and 90s rock music. And everything was really terrific. We were just worrying about the smaller things that people in Manhattan worry about. And then one morning, Jacob woke up and he had headaches and nausea. They persisted for 6 weeks, and I went to doctor, and we couldn't identify what the issues were. And then one Sunday morning, I got a call from our pediatrician. He said, please come immediately to the office. So Jacob and Michael and I went to the office. The physician sat us down and put Jacob on the examining bed, and he did a test on him. He said, follow my finger one way and then the other, and touch my nose. And then he asked Jacob to go out and wait in the waiting room, and he put himself on the examining table. He was wearing a little Snoopy tie, and he said to Mike and I think your son has a brain tumor. So that changed our life. I brought with me today some written recordings of the blog I wrote through CaringBridge about our experience. I just want to read one to you. Last Monday, this is March 5th, 2007. Last Monday, Jacob was diagnosed with metastatic medulloblastoma. He had surgery on Tuesday. In the short run, while the operation itself went as expected, Jacob developed posterior fossa syndrome. This has caused him to lose much of his capacity for speech, to lose much of his ability to volitionally move his muscles, and to regress emotionally. If there are silver linings to episodes like this, they include the outpouring of love and support from many of our relatives and friends. The recovery rates are promising, and by 3 years after treatment, a child who is disease-free is pretty well out of the woods. That would have occurred around Jacob's 13th birthday. Let's all then plan for the most beautiful bar mitzvah ever. We'll stay in touch. Thank you for everything. So if any of you have ever been touched by this world, you know that parents of seriously ill kids will do absolutely anything. I'm trained as a lawyer, and I had my last science class in 9th grade, and stopped because I didn't do so well. But I got a PubMed account. I started reading medical textbooks. I went to medical meetings. I talked to physicians and scientists in 36 different hospitals in 12 countries around the world. I ended up putting together 3 of the protocols that were reviewed through Jacobs Hospital's IRB, of course with support and leadership of Jacob's oncologist, and were used on him. And we went through the period. So I just want to read to you first another CaringBridge blog. This is a year later, December 16th, 2007. Jacob has embraced life with abandon. He's going to PE, play dates, watching school wrestling matches, and it goes without saying, rooting for the Dutch men basketball team. He has created a full range of facial expressions, and it's great to see his smile again. Jacob still uses a wheelchair, but can walk around the apartment. Jacob's speech is more fluent. It's still a bit slower than a typical New Yorker's, but he's now fully expressive. He teases his doctors about the tests they make him do, often by preempting them by running through the battery of tests on his own. And he's gone online to order t-shirts that read, "Bald is the new black," and "White cells are for losers." So I'm going to skip over the next section of our lives. We lived day to day, and there was just an intense love of life, an intense love for each other. There was wild, unmoored hope, and there was terrible fear. And then it all came to an end. And this is my third and final CaringBridge blog that I'll read to you. It's a year later, January 16th, 2009. Dear friends and family, as you know, our son Jacob has been struggling with brain cancer for the past 2 years now. last night, he lost that struggle. We are grateful for all the love and support of our family and friends. With it, these past 2 years have provided many joyous moments. Throughout his many treatments, Jacob maintained a remarkably positive attitude. He rarely complained. He faced each new phase of challenges head on and put everything he had into making the most of each day. His wry smile and dry wit brought happiness all around. As difficult as the last 2 years have been for Jacob, the end was peaceful. Lying between us as we recounted stories and sang to him, Jacob just went to sleep, pain-free at home. So Jacob died on a wintry Friday morning. I spent the day cleaning out all of his medical supplies. I didn't want him to be remembered by that. And then the next day, Saturday morning, I put my laptop on the kitchen table and I started Kids vs. Cancer. The truth was, I was alive and Jacob was not, and the world had to change. I'm recalling the comments the speakers made here about the mountain. The image I had was actually of a mountain as well, which was I just needed to get a small shovel and start moving the mountain. So how to do that? Well, I had talked to many physicians during Jacob's treatment, and what I learned from them is all the challenges that they face as they try to provide better treatments to kids. Access to drugs was a critical problem for them. Although there are so many really wonderful and exciting drugs being developed for adult cancers, it was very challenging for them to ever get these drugs in pediatric clinical trials. And even more difficult was getting a drug developed expressly for pediatric cancer. Tumor tissue was scarce, and of course, funding was always scarce. So with that in mind, I also took a look at what other families were doing who had lost their kids. Some of them just collapsed inside themselves. They got divorced. Their kids stopped going to school. Some founded foundations. They did community awareness programs. They did bake sales. They did head shaving, fundraising activities. So my question, though, was this. If we have the leading pharmaceutical industry in the United States, how can we take a little slice of that, a teeny slice, and redirect it towards solving the problems our kids face? And so with that, I focused on what we could do with Kids vs. Cancer. My first 2 hires were my 6-year-old son, Ben, and his babysitter, Jen. We started off as small as could be. And the question we looked at is a legislative solution called the Creating Hope Act. So I drafted this bill. We introduced it into Congress, and in 2012, it was passed into law. The problem that we defined in the Creating Hope Act is this. Since 1978, there had only been 2 drugs at that time that had been approved expressly for pediatric cancers. And how could that possibly be the case? The fact is the market is too small for any for-profit entity to achieve a reasonable risk-adjusted return on investment if they go in and have to rely solely on proceeds from that market for their revenue stream. So what we did is we created an incentive program where the incentive existed outside the market in the form of a voucher. The way it works is if a company develops a drug for pediatric cancer or another pediatric life-threatening illness and receives approval, the FDA would give the company a voucher. And with the voucher comes rights to faster FDA review on a future drug, perhaps a blockbuster drug like a heart disease drug. The time to market, the faster time to market for that blockbuster drug constitutes the incentive, and the vouchers are fully tradable. So we also created a designation process in this, and the way that works is that the company developing, say, the pediatric cancer drug can go to the FDA very early in the drug development process, maybe preclinical or phase 1, which might be 5 to 10 years out from approval, and it can get a designation which would state that the disease for which they're developing the drug qualifies as a pediatric rare disease, so that if the drug is approved, the drug will qualify for the voucher. And with this information, the entrepreneur can increase the valuation of their company if they have a small, thinly capitalized company. They can use it to attract investors. They can use it for an exit strategy. So I had never lobbied on Capitol Hill before, And I went door to door. I had over 500 meetings. I gathered 172 co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle. Our best lobbyists were Jacob's friends and his little brother Ben. Nobody could make a case like they could for why this was important. I can't tell you how many meetings ended up in tears and hugs from cynical staffers and hard-scrabbled senators. And at the end of the day, the bill was passed, and it has been a success. So what does a success look like? Well, 4 vouchers have sold since 2012, and the last one sold for $350 million on August 15th, 2015. There have now been 9 vouchers that have been created, although many of them had not yet transferred. And as you can see, the total valuation of the vouchers transferred has been almost $1 billion in incentives for pediatric rare disease drug development. So we're really excited about this program. We think that this sky-high valuation for vouchers is sustainable because we are finding that, in fact, pharmaceutical companies are getting value for the vouchers. There was a very exciting case last summer where 2 major pharmaceuticals were racing to market for a new PCSK9 drug, and one, by using the voucher, jumped the queue over the other, got in the US market faster, even though they had lost out on first placement in the European market. And since then, there's been tremendous demand for the vouchers. We think this is a sustainable model. So this is really the focus project that I wanted to talk to you about. But let me also tell you about a few other programs that we have developed since at Kids vs. Cancer. The Voucher Program addresses drugs developed expressly for children with life-threatening illnesses. But as we know, or maybe some of you know who are in the biotech world, and I hope there are a lot of you here, there are 900 drugs in the adult cancer pipeline. And what can we do to see whether any of those drugs could help kids with cancer? In fact, there is only a very small handful of those drugs that are in clinical studies for kids. So we have a multi-pronged approach here. We have a new bill that we introduced into Congress, under which companies would have reasons to develop, to undertake certain pediatric studies of these drugs for kids when the molecular target of the drug they're developing is relevant in a pediatric indication. And we hope and expect that this will actually be passed into law in June of 2017. We are working with the FDA and the NIH on the question of why are kids arbitrarily excluded from adult cancer trials. Our view is that children should be on trials unless there's a scientific rationale not to include them. We have really had really wonderful conversations with FDA and NIH. And I'll just say to you now, stay tuned. I think in the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to have very exciting announcements from both institutions in this regard. And our third program looks at the burden that physicians face when they try to get their kids access to unapproved drugs through a program called compassionate use, which was a federal law that was enacted, but is exceedingly difficult for physicians to use to their patients' benefit. And so we just hired a team of nurses to work with physicians to fill out the paperwork, to identify the people and entities they need to speak with, and to handhold them through the whole process so that they don't need to spend their valuable time on this. We have a few other programs we do too. I just want to tell you about one of my favorite. We work with families of kids with terminal brain cancer, helping them donate tissue. And I'm thrilled that there's a signer here because, in fact, a mom I worked with last week who found us online and unfortunately had to donate her beautiful 9-year-old son Aiden's tissue, is deaf. And she is now going to be an active member of our outreach program, finding other families who also may have to face this choice. So let me end where we began. We are really facing a moment in cancer drug development that is incredibly exciting and is a tipping point. New drugs and new therapies are coming on the market that are providing the kinds of cures and treatments that we haven't seen in our generation. At Kids vs. Cancer, we've taken opportunity to harness all these new jumps forward in science through the Creating Hope Act. We are working with Congress, with FDA, NIH, and with physicians and companies to see what we can do bring drugs developed for adults also to kids. At home, this is my new family now. Ben, that's a little old photo. Ben is now 14. He's in a rock band called 2020. They're good. They play at the Comet Pizza every month in Washington, D.C. They got a gig on the White House lawn last spring. And this is Sarah. She's now 6. Her passions are Legos, and she's dancing in the Nutcracker. And this is now how we do family photos with Jacob. He would be a college freshman this year. So let me thank you for inviting you here. You know, this to me is an incredibly exciting room of people who, you all are entrepreneurs and committed also to changing the world. And my question to you is, what do we need to do next? What are the other obstacles we need to move so that drug development for children who are seriously ill proceeds at the same level as it does with adults? I invite all of you to join me thinking of this, and I look forward to seeing what all of you are doing to change the world. Thank you.